We have got something a little different for today's video. We have got this 64 Impala. It's an SS car. It's got a Powerglide in it. We're gonna work on the transmission. So what we're dealing with on this Powerglide, here's where the speedometer cable comes in. We've got a leak there. There's some O-rings on this. I'll show you here in a second. We have got a pan leak as well. This has got a cork gasket on it. Nothing wrong with the cork gasket, but what'll happen is somebody probably over tightened it and it crushes that cork and then you get a leak. We've also got the servo cover here. It's got a leak. So we're gonna throw a new gasket on here, a new gasket on the pan. We're going to replace the speedometer bullet as well as the speedometer cable. So let's get into it. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come right back here. I already pulled that dipstick out of there. And I'm gonna feed a straw down my dipstick tube. And I've got a machine that I can suck out that old fluid with, so when I drop that pan, I make a whole lot less of a mess. Now that we got all the fluid out of it that we can, I'm gonna go ahead and get this pan off of here. So we got the pan off. I go ahead and just set it right down here, let everything drip into it. I'll clean up all this area so we can get it resealed. Once I'm done with that, I'll move my pig mat over and I'll empty this and clean this all up. Now that I've got this all cleaned up, I always like to go around it with a razor blade, if you can get one in there, or a piece of Scotch-Brite or something. Get all the imperfections you can off this sealing surface. And as you can see on this one's got some pitting and such. So that's another reason why it was leaking. Now, a lot of people will probably argue with this, but I'm gonna go ahead and put just a thin layer of RTV on the transmission side, as well as the pan side of my gasket. For that reason, you see this little pitting and stuff, you'll get fluid leaking out of there. Whereas if you just nice little thin layer, now you don't wanna overdo it, but a nice little thin layer of RTV will take up a lot of those gaps and keep it from leaking. Now, same thing on the pan side. We can see we've got some pitting going on here, so a little RTV will go a long way on that. Now I'm just going to put a little bit on my finger, just kind of rub it around on the surface. Not enough that it would squeeze out the sides or anything like that. Now I also opted for the gasket that is not cork. It's kind of a rubbery paper type material. It's from Felpro. They make pretty good gaskets. It's always good to run a couple bolts in all the way as far as you can with your hand, so it holds that pan up against the transmission. Now, as you may have noticed, when I was tightening these down, I kind of went across. So just went back and forth across as I tightened them, just so it's all evenly tightened. Servo cover is leaking. 3 bolts hold it on. We're going to take it off, follow the same procedure that we did with the pan. Next problem with this car is the speedometer doesn't work. I've actually looked at this car once before, and what I had found was the speedometer cable was broken. The end of it was. Now the reason it was broken, I went ahead and rerouted it, but when it came in, the speedometer cable was run underneath the park brake and the shift linkage. So you can see how much of a bind that would put it in, trying to come back up and under those. So it actually needs to be run over the top. We're gonna have to replace this one since it is broke. We also have a leak here in the bullet. So on this, you've got a single bolt that holds it on. This whole assembly will come out. Once again, just take this single bolt out. And that's what holds the assembly in. You actually don't even have to take it all the way out. This just slides up in there, so if you loosen it, it'll swing down out of the way. Next, we just need to pull this assembly out. And you'll see that it's got a gear on it. So that gear spinning is actually what rotates your cable. That's how your speedometer works. So here's our new assembly. So, we've got a couple different things going on here. You've got this O-ring, which seals to the case. You've got seals on the inside of this, which is what seals the fluid from coming out around your gear. So, it's always kind of hard to tell where it's leaking from. Fairly inexpensive, so just opted to buy a new one. Got some new gears as well. Now, you'll need to count the number of teeth on your gear. There are different options for depending on how the car was set up. So count the number of teeth you have. Make sure you use the right one or your speedometer is going to be off. Now once you figure out which gear you need, rub a little bit of transmission fluid on the shaft before you put it in here. And you're also going to want to put just a little bit around this O-ring to help it seal. Then we're just going to insert this back into the transmission. Then you're going to have to spin the assembly around until you find the spot that holds it in. And you're going to want to make sure that stays in place as you tighten it down, because it will try to spin and fall out of place. Just wanted to give you a quick look of how this assembly goes together. You can see the bullet piece pushed into the case. You can see your gear, and then you've got this little retainer. Fits right into that groove. Now for the speedometer cable. It runs over the frame right here, comes right on up and goes into the firewall, so we can see that from under the hood. So if we come from the driver's side, we can see that cable coming right up here and running into the firewall. Now it's going to screw into the back of the gauges. So let's go inside and see if we can figure out where that is. Now this is pretty hard to see. If we look, we can see that cable coming through the firewall right there. And it runs up and threads in to the back of the gauges. So I just got to get my arm in there and unthread it from that end. Once I get it unthreaded from the back of the gauges, just got to pull it through the firewall here. Here's our new one. It's always a good idea. Just go ahead and make sure they're the same length. These are. Another thing to take note of is the big end is the transmission. The small is for up on the gauges. So I've got that new speedometer cable fed through the firewall. Got it connected to the back of the speedometer itself. Now on the inside, you basically just got to do it by feel. You can't really see it at the same time you can reach it. Now, here we've got the cable running down underneath. The big end here has to be fed through the frame up here on at the front. You can't come back here, there's not enough room. Now, you'll see the spring that comes through. This thing should spin freely. It's also squared, so it'll fit into that plastic gear we looked at earlier. So, see if we can get it lined up. Then as soon as you do, you just got to screw your speedometer cable onto your bullet. So to recap, put a new bullet in, new gear, new speedometer cable. We resealed the pan, we resealed the servo cover. Now I'm gonna go through, clean this all up with brake clean. And then one thing that you wouldn't necessarily have to do, but I probably will, is I'm gonna let this thing set overnight, let all the RTV and everything set up, and then I'm gonna fill it in the morning. Pretty much done with this car. I'm gonna fill the transmission back up tomorrow, make sure everything works, make sure we don't have any leaks. Figured I'd do a quick walk around. This is a 64 Impala. This is an SS car. It's a survivor car. I believe it has been painted. Never had a restoration though. Pretty nice car, two-door. Pretty clean interior. It's an automatic car. Hard top. Pretty straight, really. A few little dings, a few little scratches here and there. Now, this car does have the 283, so I mean, not quite as desirable as the 327s or the 409s or anything like that, but still got the V8. I think these made like 195 horsepower when they were new. But all in all, it's a pretty clean, cool old car. This was kind of a cool project, a little out of the norm for me. It's not a Ford, it's not fuel injected, not a mod motor. Mixed it up a little bit. Cool to work on an old car like this. Things were way simpler back then. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Lots of car things going on. See you guys next time.